There are harbors that cradle nations, and there are those that consume them. Port Royal was both. To the English, newly triumphant in 1655, the deep, natural harbor at the mouth of Kingston Bay was a gift from heaven. It was wide enough to anchor 100 ships, deep enough to swallow a fleet. The Spanish had barely used it. Their gaze was turned inward, toward missions and cattle estates. But the English saw in its calm blue waters a mirror for their ambition, a place where the wealth of empires could flow like the tide. And so, out of the sand and salt, Port Royal was born. It was a city of taverns and warehouses, shipyards and sin. Governor Edward D'Oyly ordered the first fortifications. Merchants followed, smelling fortune. Within a decade, Port Royal became the busiest port in the English Americas. Its wharves, heavy with commerce and crime. Ships came from Bristol, London, and Barbados, bearing rum, muskets, and human lives. Others arrived from Tortuga and Hispaniola, their decks blackened with cannon soot and plundered gold. Every tide brought something new: sugar from the plantations, silver from Spanish galleons, whispers of rebellion from enslaved tongues. The harbor became a crossroads of greed and grace. Sailors knelt beside thieves in the chapels of St. Paul's, praying before setting sail to rob again. Planters toasted the king while buying contraband from pirates. Women of every complexion, African, English, Spanish, Creole, traded beauty for survival, carving out their own power in a world dominated by men. As historian Nuala Zahidia writes, Port Royal was the bloodstream of the English Caribbean, pulsing with gold and corruption in equal measure. By day, the sun burned white over the masts and market stalls. By night, the city roared with laughter, gunfire, and hymns. Yet beneath the drunken songs and clinking coins, the sea kept its counsel. For every ship that arrived, another wrecked in the shallows. For every fortune made, a dozen lives were lost. The very ground, that narrow spit of sand between the Caribbean and the Great Blue, trembled with the weight of what it bore. It would not hold forever. After the conquest in 1655, England sought to make Jamaica more than just a military outpost. They envisioned an empire in miniature, a jewel to rival Spain's American riches. New settlers arrived, soldiers who chose to stay, planters from Barbados seeking land, merchants from Bristol, and, of course, slave ships from Africa. By 1661, Jamaica's European population was small, but determined its enslaved African population was already growing rapidly. The land was surveyed, parceled out, and sold. The English built roads, forts, and wharves. The old Spanish capital, Villa de la Vega, was renamed Spanish Town but kept as an administrative seat. A ghost wearing English clothes, where Spanish ranches once grazed cattle, Englishmen planted a new crop sugarcane. The land that once fed villagers now yielded molasses, rum, and coin for a distant empire. But before Sugar truly ruled, England's first and most profitable harvest from Jamaica came from the sea. The Caribbean was a chessboard of empire, every island a contested square. Spain still called it El Mar, Clausum, the closed sea, claiming every treasure by divine decree. England, young in empire but old in envy, answered with cannon and cunning. From the 1660s onward, Jamaica's governors sanctioned a new breed of warrior, the privateer. These men carried official documents called letters of marque, signed by the crown, which turned piracy into policy and bloodshed into business. For every Spanish galleon plundered, a tenth of the loot went directly into the governor's coffers. Port Royal became the empire's marketplace of violence. Its taverns echoed with boasts of raids on Cartagena, Havana, and Panama. Among these ruthless privateers, one man rose above all others: Henry Morgan. Born in Wales around 1635, he arrived in the Caribbean soon after the English conquest and climbed the ranks through sheer cunning and brutality. Between 1668 and 1671, Morgan's assaults on Puerto Príncipe, Portobello, and finally, Panama City made him a legend. He led over 1,000 men across the treacherous Isthmus of Panama and burned the city to ash. The chronicler Alexander Exquemelin, who served with Morgan, wrote, Captain Morgan put the city to the sword and flame. No church was spared, nor any soul unstripped of gold. Yet in his name, the English found glory. Morgan returned to Port Royal a hero. London, though officially embarrassed by his methods, was secretly enriched by them. In 1674, he was knighted. He became Sir Henry Morgan Pirate turned Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. Under his rule, the city oscillated between order and chaos. He drank deeply, quarreled freely, and helped draft the very laws that once would have condemned him. As historian Carla Garbina Pestana notes, Port Royal became the empire's paradox made flesh, where piracy underwrote the birth of English law, and sin financed the making of civilization. By the 1690s, Port Royal had become both a marvel and a menace. It was a city gilded in excess and money beloved, sinking in spirit. Its 2-mile sandbar teemed with nearly 7,000 souls, sailors, merchants, enslaved people, and sinners of every stripe. It was said that 1 in every 4 buildings was a tavern, a brothel, or a gambling house. Gold flowed like water, but the churches rang hollow. Then, on the morning of June 7, 1692, the world broke. The earth shook violently, streets split open, and entire buildings slid silently into the sea. Within minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal, the wickedest city on earth, lay underwater. Over 4,000 souls perished instantly. Boats floated among barrels and roof tiles. The once blue harbor turned black with debris. Plague and famine followed, claiming even more lives. Preachers and clergymen called it divine retribution, declaring it God's wrath upon a city too wicked to be spared. The survivors fled inland, founding a new settlement in 1693 on higher ground. With hopes of a cleaner conscience, they called it Kingston. Under the waves, the drowned city slept. It became the Pompeii of the New World. Every rusted chain and shattered chalice recovered from the depths whispered a timeless warning. Empires built on greed will sink, as surely as sand gives way to sea. After the fall of Port Royal, England turned its full attention to sugar, the new gold. The sugar economy required vast amounts of land, massive mills, fleets of ships, and above all, labor. From the 1660s onward, ships from Bristol, London, and Liverpool joined the horrific triangular trade. They carried guns and cloth to Africa, exchanged them for enslaved Africans, transported those human beings across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and returned to England with holds full of sugar and rum. By the 1700s, Jamaica had become one of the richest colonies in the world, a kingdom of sugar plantations stretching from the coast to the cool, green hills. But beneath that immense wealth, the island bled. Tens of thousands of Africans were worked to exhaustion, whipped, and broken in the name of profit. Yet, they sang. And in those songs, born of memory and pain, lay the seed of resistance. Empires may conquer with force, but they endure through mixture. By the dawn of the 18th century, Jamaica had become an alchemy of bloodlines and beliefs. 3 worlds, Dano-African and European, were colliding and combining. The language began to change. English grammar mingled with African rhythms and vocabulary, birthing Creole, a new tongue of survival and communication. Faiths intertwined. Beneath the surface of Protestant hymns, ancestral African prayers pulsed with life, adapting to the new world. Food was transformed. Cassava, okra, and breadfruit, staples of West Africa and the indigenous Tano, blended with European ingredients, creating a cuisine of pure invention and resilience. Music, too, became a fusion. The beat of African drums met the melody of European fiddles. Songs of sorrow found a voice alongside songs of celebration. Art and dress followed suit, as English cotton was transformed by African color and style, proving that beauty could persist, even amid the harshest brutality. Even in the endless toil of the plantations, laughter, love, and strength endured. The world of Zaimaka, the island's original Tanonem, was becoming a fragile mosaic. The English ruled, but the spirit of the island, a spirit forged in Africa and the Americas, remained on. From the very first lash of the whip, there was defiance. Some revolts were open and violent plantations set aflame. Overseers attacked. Others used more subtle means to poison their masters. By day, the island groaned under the weight of empire, but by night, it remembered a different life. In the slave quarters, hidden songs called out to ancestors, and deep in the hills, The sound of conch shells echoed through the forest, a signal from the Maroons, communities of escaped Africans who refused to be enslaved. Every crack of the whip in the cane fields below was answered by a drumbeat from the mountains above. Every chain forged in the fires of the plantations would one day rattle in a song of freedom. The entire island was waiting, holding its breath, for the fire in the hills to finally ignite. That fire was coming. A hidden nation, forged in the mountains, was about to step out of the shadows and into legend. A people with roots in Africa, in Spain, and in the first memories of Jamaica itself, a people who would never bow again. Now let's turn our attention again to Kingston. Let's dig a little deeper into Port Royal's history. Now, Kingston was the complete opposite of Port Royal. It was designed to be sober, structured, and focused on trade. Its streets were laid out in a neat grid. Its warehouses were built with sturdy imported bricks. Its markets pulsed with the steady rhythm of commerce, the loading and unloading of ships, the buying and selling of goods produced by enslaved labor. Where pirates once raised their glasses in rowdy taverns, plantation owners now sat under ceiling fans, signing contracts. At the docks, enslaved Africans unloaded endless barrels of rum and molasses. Spanish Town was still the official seat of government, but Kingston quickly became the island's economic powerhouse, a city born not from plunder, but from profit. This shift in Jamaica mirrored a change in England's entire attitude toward the Caribbean. The swashbuckling bravado of the buccaneer was replaced by the cold, calculated discipline of the planter. The lust for gold gave way to the steady, demanding production of sugar. What was once a wild frontier of vice and violence became a well-oiled engine of commerce and control. As one historian put it, disaster in the Caribbean wasn't an interruption of empire, it was the very condition of it. The earthquake that sank Port Royal didn't humble England, it hardened its resolve. Where one city fell, another rose in its place, more orderly, more profitable, and infinitely more cruel. But the spirit of Port Royal didn't just disappear. It mutated. The same reckless daring that had once fueled Henry Morgan's raids on Spanish cities now drove slavers across the Atlantic. The same insatiable thirst for quick fortune that had built Port Royal's taverns now built massive plantations. The morality of the sea, exploit, extract, expand, was transplanted onto the soil. Another historian famously wrote that the Caribbean was both a graveyard and a garden, where death was the engine and profit was the flower. Amid this brutal transformation, the survivors of the 1692 earthquake, both free and enslaved, carried the memory of that day. They had seen with their own eyes how solid stone could sink into the sea, how immense pride could drown, and how a lifetime of fortune could vanish in a single tremor. In their songs, their whispered prayers, and their late-night stories, the sea became a powerful teacher, a cruel but honest one. It taught a fundamental lesson. Empire is temporary, but the human spirit endures. Along the coasts of St. Catherine and St. Andrew, the descendants of those who fled the earthquake established small fishing communities. They passed down stories to their children, tales of the drowned city still glowing beneath the waves. They said its windows flickered with a ghostly light, and its church bells could still be heard tolling beneath the tide. To go underneath the water, they whispered, was to see the very bones of empire laid bare. Centuries later, archaeologists would find truth in these legends. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, divers like Edwin Link and Robert Marks explored the underwater ruins. They uncovered entire streets, furniture, pewter plates, and even a pocket watch. Its hands frozen at 11:43 a.m., the exact moment the earth broke apart. These artifacts are now displayed in the Port Royal Archaeological Museum, silent witnesses to a world of both grandeur and immense guilt. In modern Jamaica, Port Royal is more than just ruins. It's a mirror reflecting the island's story of survival. The same sea that swallowed the city now provides a livelihood for fishermen. The same sands that once betrayed its foundations now anchor powerful stories of endurance. Tourists come and marvel at the coral-encrusted walls, listening to guides talk about sin and divine punishment. But the real lesson is more subtle. It's the story of how Jamaica's destiny has always been forged in the collision of creation and destruction. The poet Comau Brathwaite wrote, "The sea is history. It remembers what men forget." And beneath the Caribbean's shimmering surface, Port Royal remembers everything. It remembers the laughter and the gunfire, the hymns and the curses, the greed and the grace. It remembers that empires, just like cities, are always built on trembling ground. And so, the story of Port Royal isn't just about a sunken city. It's the prologue to the age of the plantation. It marks the transition from the wild chaos of piracy to the rigid order of profit, from the perceived freedom of the sea to the absolute bondage of the land. The earthquake didn't end Jamaica's entanglement with empire, it was a baptism. From those ruins, a new society began to form, still restless, still deeply divided, but impossibly alive. But even as Kingston rose and the plantation system tightened its grip, another story was unfolding, quietly and in the shadows. Thanks for watching. If you want to see what happens next in this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next chapter.